I want to start by asking you a question. I want you to think. What do these four have in common? The first, a young refugee woman, born in Somalia, raised in Malaysia and Syria, and now protected as a refugee in Canada. The second, one of the largest law firms in the world, headquartered in downtown Manhattan. The third, a small legal aid NGO in Beirut, Lebanon. And the fourth, the United Nations here in Geneva. The answer? They all believe refugee rights matter. According to the UN Refugee Agency, there are more than 38 million refugees today, the highest number ever recorded. You may have seen this number reported in the news. No doubt you've seen images on your phone, on television, of new conflicts, of new people displaced. You may have felt numb to these images. You may have wanted or tempted to scroll past them. I'm sure you've heard politicians blaming refugees for rising crime rates and failing economies. Maybe your community, your family, have passed comments posted online, shared posts that perpetuate these views. But behind every number, behind every image, behind every political attack and misinformed post is a person with hopes, a person with dreams, a person with rights. Yet when you are displaced, even having access to the most basic of these, to education, to work, to freedom of movement, can be a daily challenge. The law is a powerful tool to unlock rights for all of us. But for refugees, it can often be used to repress and restrict. And many refugees cannot access legal information and assistance to help them know, use, and shape the law, limiting their ability and their agency to claim their rights. This woman and these organizations, they are all part of a collective initiative to change this. They're all part of a global legal community pledge that unites over 100 stakeholders, bar associations, law schools, refugee-led organizations, to use the law to empower refugees. I coordinate that initiative, and I want to share some things I've learned about driving change today. Before I do that, I just want to take a quick step back and provide a little bit of context here. In 1951, after World War II had displaced millions, countries around the world met here in Geneva at a UN conference, and they adopted the Refugee Convention, legally obligating governments to protect those fleeing persecution. Over the next 7 decades, we saw the number of people displaced globally rise and rise, particularly in the global south. It became clear that the tools and structures that had been created in Europe to protect those displaced were not enough. That government action alone was not enough. And so, countries came together again And in 2018, they adopted the Global Compact on Refugees, which calls for a whole-of-society approach, engaging businesses, religious organizations, non-profits, and others in refugee protection. And it is in that context that the pledge that I coordinate was developed. So, when I first started this role, I used to describe myself as a bridge builder, connecting refugees on one side with their legal needs, with the legal community on the other, who had the knowledge and the expertise to address those needs. However, there were two fundamental flaws in approaching my work this way. The first, it disregarded the knowledge, the skills, the agency of displaced people. Luckily, I was challenged on that perception. The Global Compact had called for greater inclusion and participation of refugees. It had acknowledged that when refugees are part of decision-making about their lives, those decisions are more relevant to their realities. A growing movement of refugee leaders, advocates, and allies were standing up. They were speaking out. And I listened. And I learned. It wasn't just about refugees having legal needs. They also had knowledge and they had skills. And so I started to reconsider what it was that I and others were actually trying to build. We started to think about what we as a legal community could do with refugees, not just for refugees. And leads me to the second of the flaws. Building a bridge was treating these communities as homogenous and mutually exclusive. But actually, there is no one refugee, like there is no one legal professional. Each have unique expertise they can bring to advancing refugee rights. And lawyers may be human rights defenders in their country and be forced to flee, becoming refugees. Refugees may use, know, and practice the law. And so it became clear what we weren't trying to build was a set of bridges, was one-way bridge between those with power and knowledge and those with needs. It was about building multiple bridges in a networked system. But for that system to be impactful, those with the lived experience of displacement that know the reality of being displaced, they needed to be at the center of that system, with the law in their hands. As refugee paralegals, as lawyers, as judges, as politicians, as empowered community members. What we needed to be building was a people-centered ecosystem. So what do I mean by that? Well, and the question you might be asking is, and why is that relevant to me? Well, I want you to think. The people-centered ecosystem approach, I believe, can be relevant to all changemakers and the world that they want to see. So what is it? Like in nature, an ecosystem is not simply a set of individual entities. It is more than the sum of its parts. And it is, I think when I first sort of started thinking about this idea, I was realizing it's not just about those on the pledge. And despite my first few years, I spent trying to grow membership. And in the first year, in fact, I achieved 20% growth. Tick. Good one, Jasmine. But that wasn't what it was about. It wasn't about having a longer and longer list of members. It was about building relationship between those members. And that is the power of a collective initiative. Take, for example, the law firm that I mentioned. They might be better known for battling mergers in the courts, rather than being experts on asylum law. But if they can be partnered up with a legal aid NGO that are experts, they can be trained to provide free legal support for refugees, pro bono. And many NGOs within our pledge have multiple collaborative pro bono partnerships, increasing access to legal assistance, and sometimes doubling what they could do without those partnerships. And building these bridges, this is now where I focus much of my effort. As you begin to build the different bridges, the different relationships between the different parts of the ecosystem, you come to understand what each can contribute to the whole. And knowing this, knowing your role, is essential to change. In nature, you wouldn't expect a bear to make honey. That's what bees do. And it's the same when it comes to change. You need to understand what your unique contributions are and focus your energy on that. So, understanding our roles, we're connecting different pieces of the ecosystem. Is it enough? No. What we needed to be doing was centering those with lived experience of displacement. And so, when refugees lead legal initiatives, we understand that they're not just benefiting from them, they are able to transform the system itself, benefiting all of us. The refugee woman I spoke of, she's a lawyer, and I work with her every day. And her lived experience of displacement allows her to connect with the communities we work with. And her legal skills allows her to translate the legal needs of those communities to our legal partners and to build legal solutions that reflect refugees' reality. And that is the essence of a people-centered approach. And it's not just a nice idea. It leads to tangible results. Members of that pledge have come together, and collectively they have pledged to provide over 1 million hours of free legal assistance with and for those displaced. This collective impact, this initiative, this ecosystem approach, it doesn't need to be limited to refugee rights. Whether it's fighting climate change, or gender inequality, or systemic injustices in your community, I believe taking such an approach can be transformative. Within these ecosystems of change, we all have a role to play, even if we are engaged in different layers of the work. Within the ecosystem, I have found my role as a connector, as a bridge and ecosystem builder. But we don't need to all be connectors. We certainly don't need to all be lawyers. We don't even need to be technical experts. We need artists to inspire. We need advocates to amplify voices. We need community members to take action. And the list goes on. So I want to end today by asking you a question. I want you to think. Not whether you have a role to play in shaping the world you want to see, but what your role will be.